Lucas Callahan adjusted the cuffs of his tailored navy blue suit, his reflection in the towering windows of the Callahan Oil headquarters staring back at him like a stranger. The Houston skyline stretched behind him, golden city lights shimmering against the night, a kingdom he was supposed to inherit. Yet, as he swirled the bourbon in his glass, the burn of the liquor did nothing to numb the emptiness pressing against his chest. The music from the rooftop gala buzzed in the background. Laughter, the clinking of champagne flutes, the polished voices of Houston's elite, effortlessly floating through the air. This was his world, lavish, powerful, untouchable, and unbearably hollow. "Lucas!" A woman's voice broke through his thoughts. Charlotte Davenport, the kind of woman who graced magazine covers, sauntered toward him, her diamond bracelet catching the light. "You disappeared. I was just telling everyone about your latest victory, closing that international deal in Dubai. They want to toast to your success." Lucas forced a smile, the kind that had been perfected over years of pretending. "That's so?" Charlotte leaned in, her fingers grazing the lapel of his jacket. "You should enjoy this, Lucas. You have everything a man could want. Power, money, the world at your feet." "Yeah," he murmured, glancing at the crowd inside. Houston's finest, all perfectly dressed, effortlessly powerful. His father, William Callahan, stood at the center of it all, commanding the room with a single glance. Everything a man could want. Then why did it feel like nothing? His father's voice cut through the noise, sharp and authoritative. "Lucas, we need to talk. Now." Something in the way William said it made the air shift. Lucas followed him to a quieter part of the rooftop, away from the prying eyes of their high society audience. His father's expression was unreadable, but Lucas had spent his entire life decoding the man. This wasn't about business. "You're making a mess of things," William said, his tone as smooth as ever, yet carrying an edge that hinted at something deeper. "The press has been all over your latest escapades." Lucas smirked. "Let me guess, too many parties, too many headlines, not enough responsibility?" William's jaw tightened. "You're 30, Lucas. It's time to stop acting like a spoiled socialite and start acting like the future of this company." Lucas arched a brow. "You didn't drag me out here just to lecture me about my lifestyle. What do you want?" William exhaled slowly, his gaze calculating. "You're getting married." Lucas blinked, then laughed. "Excuse me? You heard me?" "No, I definitely did. I just can't believe you think I'd actually go along with that." "You will." Lucas set his glass down on the railing. "Let me get this straight. You think forcing me into marriage is going to magically turn me into the perfect son? That's low, even for you." William's expression didn't change. "It's already arranged. Sierra Lawson, rancher, Texas Hill Country. Her family's land is one of the most valuable in the region, but they're struggling financially. This marriage will benefit both sides." Lucas scoffed. "And what's in it for you?" His father smiled slightly, the kind that never quite reached his eyes. "I'll secure one of the last independent land holdings in Texas, and you'll finally grow up." "Ah, so it's a business deal, like everything else in your life." "Like everything in our lives," William corrected. "You want to continue enjoying the privileges of being a Callahan? Then you marry her. Otherwise—" He let the unspoken words hang in the air. Lucas's fingers curled into fists at his sides. His father didn't need to spell it out. No more money, no more luxury, no more safety net. He could leave, walk away. But Lucas Callahan had never lived a day outside the Callahan empire, and they both knew it. "You'll have time to pack," William said smoothly, pulling out a sleek envelope and placing it in Lucas's hand. "Your flight leaves tomorrow morning." Lucas stared at the envelope, the weight of his father's control pressing down on him like a chain. And if I say no? William met his gaze, unfazed. Then you better figure out how to survive on your own, because as far as I'm concerned, you won't be a Callahan anymore. Lucas swallowed, the reality sinking in like a stone. He had no choice. The sun was already high when Lucas stepped off the small private plane, the Texas heat wrapping around him like a vice. The air smelled different here, earthy, fresh, nothing like the city's crisp, conditioned air. His shoes crunched against the gravel as he adjusted his sunglasses, taking in the view of endless rolling hills and a sprawling ranch that looked like it had stood for generations. A woman stood by a white pickup truck, arms crossed, expression unreadable. Sierra Lawson. She was nothing like the women he was used to. No designer labels, no calculated smiles. Just jeans, boots, and a quiet strength in the way she held herself. "Lucas Callahan," she said, her tone flat, unimpressed. "You're late." Lucas smirked, shifting his duffel bag over his shoulder. "Nice to meet you too, darling." Sierra's expression didn't change. "Let's get one thing straight. I didn't ask for this, but I have a ranch to run, and if putting up with you keeps my family's land from being sold off, then fine. Just stay out of my way." Lucas tilted his head, amused. "Wow, and here I thought we'd at least pretend to like each other until the wedding photos were taken." Sierra's eyes narrowed. "We're getting married in 2 days. Keep up." Lucas chuckled, shaking his head. "Well, sweetheart, this is going to be fun." Sierra turned on her heel, already walking toward the truck. "Get in. You'll be sleeping in the guest house." Lucas sighed, running a hand through his hair. This was going to be a disaster, and yet for the first time in a long time, something about it felt different. He just wasn't sure if that was a good thing yet. The gravel crunched under Lucas Callahan's shoes as he followed Sierra Lawson toward the pickup truck. The Texas sun burned high in the sky, casting long, golden light over the open fields, stretching endlessly around them. He wasn't sure what unsettled him more, the sheer vastness of this place, or the fact that the woman beside him looked like she'd rather be anywhere else. She yanked open the truck door, pausing only to glance at him over her shoulder. "Get in." Lucas exhaled, shaking his head. Aren't newlyweds supposed to ride off into the sunset together? Maybe throw in a little hand-holding for the cameras? Sierra didn't even blink. "This isn't a fairy tale, Callahan. You're 2 minutes from being left in the dust." Lucas smirked but said nothing as he climbed into the passenger seat. The truck smelled like leather and faint traces of hay, a sharp contrast to the expensive colognes and polished interiors he was used to. He adjusted his cuffs, shifting uncomfortably when Sierra revved the engine, sending the truck bouncing down the dirt road. The silence between them stretched, thick with unspoken tension. He studied her from the corner of his eye. The way her hands gripped the wheel, steady, firm. The way she kept her gaze locked on the road ahead, like looking at him too long might set something on fire. "So, are we going to talk about it?" Lucas finally asked. Sierra scoffed. "Talk about what?" "Oh, I don't know. The fact that we're getting married in 2 days and you seem about as thrilled as someone getting a root canal." Sierra tightened her grip. "This is a business arrangement. That's all it is." Lucas chuckled. "Right, because nothing says business deal like a wedding cake and matching rings." She shot him a warning look. "Don't push me." "Fine, fine." He raised his hands in surrender. "But let's get one thing straight. I didn't sign up for this either. My father made it very clear that I marry you, or I lose everything." Sierra didn't respond right away. Instead, she kept her eyes on the road, the muscles in her jaw tightening. "Must be tough," she said after a moment, her voice laced with something he couldn't quite place. Lucas turned his head toward her. "Excuse me." She exhaled sharply, shaking her head. "Losing everything? That's a foreign concept to you, isn't it?" His stomach twisted, though he wasn't sure why. What's that supposed to mean? She pulled up to a long gravel driveway leading to the ranch house. You've had everything handed to you, Callahan. Money, power, a name that opens doors without you lifting a finger. You think losing your trust fund is the same as struggling to keep land that's been in your family for generations? Because it's not. Lucas stared at her, surprised by the sudden fire in her voice. He expected her to be annoyed with him, sure, but this was something else, something deeper. He leaned back in his seat. And yet, here you are, willing to marry a stranger to save your ranch. Sierra's knuckles whitened around the steering wheel. Don't you dare act like you understand what it's like to have no choice. Lucas didn't reply. For the first time since he landed in Texas, he didn't have a comeback. The truck rolled to a stop in front of a 2-story ranch house, its wraparound porch shaded by oak trees. The house was old but well kept, sturdy in a way that spoke of history and generations before them. Sierra stepped out, slamming her door shut before striding toward the barn, without another word. Lucas let out a low whistle. Well, that went great. A chuckle came from the side. He turned to find an older woman standing on the porch, wiping her hands on a dish towel. Her silver-streaked hair was tied back, her eyes sharp and knowing. "You must be Lucas," she said. He forced a smile, stepping toward her. "That obvious?" She smirked. The city shoes gave it away. Lucas glanced down at his polished loafers, now covered in dust, and sighed. "I had a feeling they wouldn't survive long." The woman extended her hand. "Maggie Lawson. I'm Sierra's grandmother." He shook it. "Nice to meet you, Mom." Maggie's gaze drifted toward the barn, where Sierra had disappeared. "She's a tough one," she said, her voice softer now. Lucas folded his arms, exhaling. "Yeah, I got that. She's had to be." There was something about the way she said it, something that hinted at a story Lucas didn't know, and for some reason, he wanted to. Maggie studied him for a moment before nodding toward the smaller house beside the main ranch. "That's the guest house. It's yours for now." Lucas nodded, dragging his duffel bag from the truck bed. "Thanks." Maggie turned to head back inside but hesitated. "Lucas," he paused, "you might think this is just some deal between your father and Sierra, but that girl has fought for everything she's ever had. Don't go making it harder on her." Lucas didn't know how to respond, so he simply gave a small nod and headed toward the guest house. Inside, it was simple but comfortable. A worn leather couch, a small kitchen, a single bedroom. Nothing like the penthouse he had in Houston, but strangely, it didn't bother him as much as it should have. He ran a hand through his hair, exhaling. What had he gotten himself into? The smell of hay and horses filled the air as Lucas walked into the barn later that evening, searching for Sierra. He found her tending to one of the horses, her back turned to him as she brushed its mane. "So, is there a handbook for this whole future husband thing, or am I just supposed to wing it?" he asked. Sierra didn't turn. "You don't need to do anything except stay out of my way." Lucas leaned against the stool. "That's going to be a little difficult, considering we're supposed to play nice in front of everyone." She finally turned, leveling him with a glare. "Let's get something straight. I don't care what people think, and I don't need you pretending this is anything more than what it is." Lucas held up his hands. "Noted." Silence settled between them, thick and heavy. Then, against his better judgment, he said, "I overheard you earlier." "In the truck." Sierra stiffened. "I don't know what it's like to fight for something like this," Lucas admitted, "but I'm not as useless as you think." Sierra studied him for a long moment before looking away. "We'll see about that," Lucas smirked. "Looking forward to proving you wrong." Sierra shook her head, muttering, "You're impossible." And yet, for the first time since he got here, there was something almost amused in her voice. Lucas decided he'd take that as progress. Lucas Callahan had attended extravagant galas, sipped champagne on yachts, and woken up in penthouses overlooking entire cities. but he had never experienced anything quite as suffocating as standing at the altar of a wedding he didn't want. The Texas heat clung to him like a second skin, the afternoon sun casting long golden streaks over the sprawling ranch where the ceremony was set up. Rows of white chairs filled with curious guests stretched before him, a mix of small-town ranchers and elite business associates flown in from Houston at his father's request. Everyone was watching. He adjusted his cufflinks, his jaw tightening. He shouldn't care what these people thought. This was just business, a formality, a contract sealed with vows instead of signatures. But when he turned his head and saw Sierra Lawson standing at the edge of the aisle, something in his chest tightened unexpectedly. She was breathtaking. Not in the way of the women he'd been used to, the ones who wore perfection like armor, whose beauty was carefully curated with diamonds and designer labels. Sierra was something else entirely. Her wedding dress was simple, the lace trailing delicately over her frame, elegant but not extravagant. Her golden brown hair was loosely curled, pieces softly framing her face. No pretenses, no manufactured glamour, just her. She wasn't smiling. Her hazel eyes met his for only a moment before shifting away, her expression carefully unreadable. If he had any lingering doubts about how she felt about this marriage, they were erased in that single look. She didn't want this any more than he did. The guests hushed as Maggie, Sierra's grandmother, stood from the front row, nodding toward the musicians. The soft melody of a string quartet began to play, filling the air with something hauntingly beautiful. Lucas exhaled slowly as Sierra started walking down the aisle. Step by step, closer. He couldn't help but notice how steady she was. No hesitation, no nerves, like she had made peace with whatever this was, or maybe she had just resigned herself to it. When she finally reached him, he caught the slight inhale she took before placing her hand in his. Her fingers were warm but tense, her grip firm. If this were any other wedding, he would have whispered something to ease the moment. Maybe a charming joke, a teasing remark, but he didn't. For once, Lucas Callahan had nothing to say. The officiant began speaking, but the words barely registered. He could feel Sierra standing beside him, the weight of expectation pressing down between them like a force neither of them could escape. When it came time for the vows, Sierra spoke first. Her voice was steady, unwavering, but it lacked warmth. It was as if she were reciting something out of obligation rather than devotion. Lucas should have expected that. Then it was his turn. He looked at her, really looked at her, and for a brief fleeting moment, he wondered what she was thinking. If she hated this as much as he did. If she wished, just for a second, that this was real. He pushed the thought away. I, Lucas Callahan, take you, Sierra Lawson. His voice was smooth, effortless. Years of business deals had trained him well. To be my wife, to have and to hold in prosperity and hardship. He hesitated just for a second. Sierra's eyes flickered, barely noticeable, but he caught it. Then he forced himself to finish. For as long as we both shall live. The words hung between them, heavy and final. The officiant turned to Sierra. Do you take Lucas to be your lawfully wedded husband? The air stilled. Lucas watched as Sierra lifted her chin slightly, a quiet defiance in her posture. Then she nodded, her voice just above a whisper. I do. There was no hesitation, no trembling voice, but there was also no softness. She had accepted her fate. The officiant smiled, turning to Lucas. And do you, Lucas, take Sierra to be your lawfully wedded wife? Lucas's heart pounded against his ribs in a way he hadn't expected. He forced a smirk, the practiced expression slipping into place like a shield. I do. There was a murmur through the crowd, the finality of it sinking in. Lucas felt his father's presence somewhere behind him, the weight of his approval lingering like an invisible hand on his shoulder. The officiant's voice rang through the warm Texas air. "You may now kiss the bride." Lucas turned to Sierra. For the first time since this entire mess started, her carefully guarded mask faltered just slightly. Her lips parted, her breath barely audible, but she didn't step back. Neither did he. He could make this easy. A brief, meaningless kiss. The kind exchanged in front of cameras and crowds, polite and forgettable. But something inside him rebelled against that. So instead, he reached up slowly, cupping her jaw, his thumb grazing against the soft skin beneath her ear. Sierra inhaled sharply, and then, without another word, he leaned in. The kiss was soft, a gentle brush of lips, deliberate but unforced. Not a performance, not an obligation. Just a moment between them, suspended in the golden light of the afternoon. And for the briefest second, Sierra kissed him back. It wasn't much, just the slightest movement, the smallest hesitation before she pulled away. But Lucas noticed, and from the way her lashes fluttered as she stepped back, he knew she had too. The applause broke through the moment, the sound pulling them apart like a sudden jolt back to reality. Lucas turned, flashing the charming grin he had perfected over years of public appearances. The kind that made people believe whatever he wanted them to. Sierra, on the other hand, had already regained her composure. She reached for his hand, not out of affection, but because it was expected, and together they faced the crowd. The reception blurred by in a whirlwind of congratulations and stiff formalities. Lucas played his part perfectly, smiling at the right moments, shaking hands, accepting compliments about the beautiful couple. But every time he glanced at Sierra, he saw the same distant expression, the same guarded walls. And yet, he couldn't stop thinking about that tiny flicker of hesitation during the kiss, the briefest, smallest moment where she'd forgotten to keep her distance. The night stretched on, filled with speeches and toasts. Lucas found himself by the bar, sipping whiskey as his father approached. "Well done," William murmured, his voice carrying that ever-present note of quiet satisfaction. Lucas smirked, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. "Glad you approve." His father's eyes gleamed. "Now, you start proving your worth." Lucas didn't answer. Instead, he let his gaze drift to where Sierra stood across the room, talking with her grandmother. Her face was unreadable, but he could still feel the ghost of her lips against his. For the first time, the reality of the situation settled over him. He was married to a woman who didn't want him, and for reasons he couldn't quite understand. That fact unsettled him far more than it should. The night was quiet, uncomfortably so. Lucas stood outside the guest house, the warm Texas air thick with the scent of earth and honeysuckle. The distant sound of crickets hummed in the background, but his mind was anything but settled. The wedding was over. The guests had left. The last of the twinkling lights on the ranch house porch had been dimmed. And now, he was officially a married man. He ran a hand through his hair, exhaling as he stared up at the sky. The stars stretched endlessly above him, brighter than any city skyline he'd ever known. It should have been peaceful. It wasn't. A door creaked open behind him. He turned to find Sierra standing at the threshold of the main house, her silhouette framed against the dim light from inside. She had changed out of her wedding dress, now in a pair of worn jeans and a loose white blouse. The sight of her like that, stripped of ceremony and pretense, did something strange to him. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Sierra crossed her arms. "Figured you'd be halfway to Houston by now." Lucas smirked, leaning against the porch railing. "Tempting, but I had a feeling you'd send the ranch hands after me with ropes and a lasso." Sierra didn't smile. "You should get some sleep. Tomorrow's an early start." Lucas raised an eyebrow. "Early start? For what?" She blinked, then shook her head with a scoff. "Right, of course. You probably think you get to sit around all day now that the wedding's done? That was the deal, wasn't it? He tilted his head. Marry you, secure the land, show up at a few charity events looking happily wed, and go about my life. Sierra's expression remained unreadable. You're living on my ranch now. And here people work. Lucas let out a soft laugh, shaking his head. You can't be serious. Dead serious. There was no amusement in her voice, no hint of playfulness, just cold, hard truth. Lucas sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. You know, most newlyweds go on a honeymoon. Maybe a beach in Mexico, champagne in hand. Not, he gestured vaguely at the stables, manual labor. Sierra shrugged. I'm not most newlyweds, and this isn't a real marriage. Lucas studied her for a beat, something flickering in her expression, something guarded. And yet, you still said, I do. Sierra's eyes darkened slightly, but she turned on her heel before he could press further. Be outside by 5. If you're late, you're on your own. Then she disappeared into the house, leaving him standing in the silence of the Texas night. Lucas let out a slow breath, staring after her. His entire life, he had been able to charm his way out of anything. Get what he wanted, bend situations to fit his needs. But Sierra Lawson, she was going to be a problem. The morning came too soon. Lucas woke to the sound of banging on the door, followed by Sierra's unmistakable voice. Up, now. He groaned, turning over, blinking against the early light filtering through the window. He glanced at the clock, 4:58 a.m. You've got to be kidding me, he muttered. Dragging himself out of bed, he threw on a t-shirt and jeans, then made his way outside. The air was crisp, a welcome contrast to the heat he knew would come later. Sierra stood by the barn, arms crossed, looking far too awake for this hour. Morning, sunshine, he said, rubbing his face. Do we at least get coffee before the torture begins? Sierra tossed him a pair of gloves. You'll earn your coffee. Lucas caught them, glancing at the barn. Let me guess. Shoveling. Hay bales. Oh no. Fixing fences. That seems like the kind of punishment you'd love to give me. Sierra didn't smile. Horses first. They need feeding before anything else. Lucas arched a brow. Can't they just feed themselves? A chuckle came from behind them. Lucas turned to find an older man leaning against the fence, his worn boots covered in dust, a weathered hat sitting low over his graying hair. That, the man said, nodding towards Sierra, is the dumbest thing I've heard all morning. Sierra smirked. Lucas, meet James Tucker, foreman, best ranch hand we've got. James tipped his hat. Pleasure, city boy. Lucas groaned. Fantastic. I see the whole ranch is just lining up to laugh at me. James clapped a hand on his shoulder. Oh, son, you ain't seen nothing yet. Lucas had never worked this hard in his life. By mid-morning, he was drenched in sweat, his back aching from lifting feed bags heavier than they had any right to be. His designer shoes were ruined. His hands, which had only ever gripped expensive pens and smooth leather steering wheels, were covered in dust and grit. Sierra, of course, was completely unbothered. She moved effortlessly from one task to the next, checking fence lines, leading horses, fixing things he didn't even know needed fixing. Lucas leaned against the barn, exhausted. Tell me again why I'm doing this. Sierra barely spared him a glance. Because you live here now, and I don't have room for dead weight. Lucas let out a slow exhale, watching her work. She was frustrating, unbelievably stubborn. And yet, there was something about her, something about the way she moved, the way she cared for every detail of this land like it was part of her, like it was in her bones. He hadn't seen passion like that in a long time. Maybe ever. She caught him staring, and he quickly looked away. Before she could say anything, another voice cut through the morning air. Well, didn't think you'd actually last the night, Callahan. Lucas turned toward the gate, where a man stood leaning against the fence. Broad shoulders, cowboy boots, the kind of confidence that only came from someone who thought they belonged here. Sierra tensed beside him. Lucas immediately knew who this was. Blake Carter, the ex. Lucas smirked, straightening. Blake, right? I heard a lot about you. Blake's eyes flicked towards Sierra. Funny, I don't remember you being part of the conversation. Sierra exhaled, looking unamused. Blake, what do you want? Blake's gaze lingered on her for a moment before shifting back to Lucas. Just came to see if Houston's golden boy actually planned to stick around. Seems like you're struggling. Lucas crossed his arms, matching his easy smirk. Oh, I don't know. I think I'm doing just fine. Blake chuckled, shaking his head. You're not built for this life, Callahan. Lucas tilted his head. And yet I'm still here. Blake's jaw tightened, but before he could say anything, Sierra stepped forward. Enough. Both men looked at her. This isn't some competition, she said firmly. Blake, if you have something useful to say, say it. Otherwise leave. Blake hesitated. Then, without another word, he tipped his hat and walked off. Lucas watched him go before glancing at Sierra. So, that was fun. She rolled her eyes. Get back to work. Lucas smirked. Something told him this marriage was going to be a lot more interesting than he originally thought. Lucas Callahan was sore in places he didn't even know existed. As he trudged toward the main house, the early morning work still clinging to his clothes in the form of dust, sweat, and an overall sense of defeat, he couldn't help but replay the events of the morning. Between hauling hay, fixing fences, and an unexpected run-in with Blake Carter, he was quickly learning that life on the ranch wasn't just work, it was a test, and so far, he was barely passing. The Texas sun hung high now, burning down over the ranch, and he swore it had been mocking him since dawn. He needed water, a shower, and maybe, if he was lucky, a moment to remind himself why he was even here. His father, the contract, the ranch, and Sierra. He let out a breath as he stepped up onto the wraparound porch. He still couldn't get a read on her. 1 second she was barely tolerating him. The next she looked at him like she was waiting for him to prove something. What exactly? He wasn't sure. Before he could step inside, the screen door creaked open, and Sierra stood in the doorway, her expression unreadable. Clean up before you sit anywhere, she said flatly. Lucas smirked, leaning against the wooden railing. Good morning to you too, wife. Her gaze flickered, but she didn't rise to the bait. Lunch is in an hour. Don't be late. Lucas raised a brow. Wait, am I actually invited? I figured I'd get a tray left outside like some stray dog. Sierra sighed, her patience already wearing thin. You're part of the ranch now, Callahan. We eat together. It's a rule. He tilted his head, intrigued. So, does that mean I'm officially part of the family? She crossed her arms. It means I don't have time to babysit you, and if you're going to survive here, you need to learn how things work. Lucas chuckled, pushing off the railing. Julie noted, Guess I'll see you at lunch, dear. Sierra muttered something under her breath before stepping back inside, letting the door swing shut behind her. Lucas exhaled, shaking his head as he made his way to the guest house. He wasn't sure what kind of battle he'd signed up for, but one thing was certain. Sierra Lawson wasn't going to make any of this easy. And oddly enough, he kind of respected that. By the time Lucas walked into the kitchen, the smell of fresh cornbread, roasted vegetables, and grilled chicken filled the air. The dining table was set, but it wasn't just for Sierra and her grandmother. Colt was already sitting at the far end, arms crossed, looking as unwelcoming as ever. Lucas let out a low whistle. Didn't realize this was a full event. Maggie Lawson smiled warmly from her spot at the stove. We always eat together after the morning work, builds community. Lucas glanced at Sierra, who was busy setting down a plate in front of her brother. She avoided his gaze, pretending to focus on the food. Didn't peg you as the family dinner type, Lucas mused, taking a seat. Sierra finally looked at him, her eyes cool. Just because I was forced into this marriage doesn't mean I let my responsibilities slip. Colt snorted. You actually showed up. I'll give you credit for that. Lucas smirked. What can I say? I'm full of surprises. Colt didn't look amused. We'll see. The tension was thick, but Maggie quickly cut through it. Eat before it gets cold, she said with a pointed look. Lucas took the hint. He picked up his fork, glancing at the spread before him. Real food, not catered meals or five-star courses, just home-cooked, simple, and real. As he started eating, he caught Sierra watching him. He swallowed, setting his fork down. What? She shrugged. Just surprised you didn't ask for a wine list or a personal chef. Lucas smirked. What, no caviar? No imported truffles? How will I ever survive? Maggie chuckled. You'll manage, sweetheart. Lucas turned to her. I like you, Maggie. You've got more faith in me than your granddaughter. Sierra rolled her eyes. Eat your food, Callahan. Lucas hid his grin as he took another bite. The meal continued in relative peace, the conversation drifting toward ranch business. Lucas listened, surprisingly interested. He hadn't expected to care about irrigation systems and cattle schedules, but there was something about the way Sierra spoke, so focused, so determined, that made him want to. It was the first time he'd seen her talk about something without her usual guarded walls, and he found himself wanting to see more of that. Just as he was about to ask a question, the screen door creaked open, and a familiar voice filled the kitchen. Well, ain't this cozy? Lucas turned, already knowing who it was. Blake Carter leaned against the doorway, arms crossed, a smirk tugging at his lips. His presence shifted the entire room. Sierra immediately stiffened, her posture going rigid. Maggie sighed. Blake, what do you want? Blake's gaze flickered between Lucas and Sierra before settling on her. Came to see if you needed help with that south fence. Figured since some people might not be up for it, I'd offer. Lucas smiled, slow and knowing. That's real generous of you, Carter, but I think we've got it covered. Blake arched a brow. That's so. Sierra exhaled, pushing her chair back. We don't need help, Blake, but thanks. Blake studied her, something unreadable in his expression. Then his gaze cut back to Lucas. You planning on sticking around, Callahan? Or just playing cowboy for a few days before heading back to your real life? Lucas didn't blink. You seem real interested in where I go, Blake. That jealousy or just insecurity? The room went still. Colt let out a low laugh, clearly enjoying the show. Maggie sighed, shaking her head. Sierra looked like she wanted to strangle them both. Blake's smirk didn't waver, but his eyes sharpened. I just know your kind. City boys don't last long out here. Lucas leaned back in his chair, folding his arms. Guess you'll just have to wait and see then. Blake held his gaze for a moment before pushing off the doorframe. Guess I will. He tipped his hat toward Sierra. You know where to find me. Then he turned and walked out, the screen door slamming shut behind him. Lucas let out a low whistle. Well, he seems fun. Sierra shot him a glare before standing. Lunch is over. We've got work to do. Lucas sighed, pushing his chair back. What, no honeymoon nap? Sierra ignored him, already walking out the door. Lucas chuckled to himself as he followed. Yeah, this was going to get interesting. Lucas Callahan had made a lot of mistakes in his life, but agreeing to repair a fence in the middle of a sweltering Texas afternoon, with zero prior experience and an audience of skeptical ranch hands, was quickly making its way to the top of that list. He wiped the sweat from his forehead, squinting against the relentless sun. The fence stretched ahead of him, its weathered wooden posts barely standing upright in some places. Sierra stood a few feet away, sleeves rolled up, her hand steady as she wrapped a section of barbed wire around a post with practiced ease. Meanwhile, Lucas had been struggling with the same section of wire for the last 10 minutes. "This is ridiculous," he muttered, yanking at the wire, only for it to snap free from his grip and coil back on itself. From behind him, James Tucker chuckled, his arms folded across his chest. "City boy, you ever even held a hammer before?" Lucas shot him a look. "I've held a lot of expensive things in my life, James. Just never something this rustic." James smirked. "Yeah, we figured." Sierra didn't even glance up from her work. "If you're done complaining, Callahan, maybe try actually doing something." Lucas exhaled, rolling his shoulders. He could feel the eyes of everyone around him, James, a few other ranch hands, and worst of all, Sierra, watching, waiting for him to fail. He wasn't about to give them that satisfaction. Steeling himself, he grabbed the hammer, lined up a nail against the wooden post, and swung. The hammer missed completely. James let out a low whistle, shaking his head. "Oh boy, this is going to be a long afternoon." Sierra sighed, finally turning toward him. "You're hitting it too loose. You need to—" Lucas cut her off with a cocky grin. "I know how to use a hammer, sweetheart." She raised an eyebrow. "Really? Because right now, it looks like you're trying to romance it." Laughter erupted from the ranch hands nearby, and Lucas felt his pride take a hit. His grin didn't falter, though. If there was one thing he had mastered over the years, it was playing things off. "I'm just warming up," he quipped, adjusting his grip. "Wouldn't want to outshine you all at your own game too soon." Sierra rolled her eyes. "Right, because we're all just shaking in our boots over here." Lucas smirked but didn't argue. Instead, he took a breath, focused this time, and tried again. The next swing hit the nail. Not perfect, but progress. Sierra tilted her head, watching. "Not bad." Lucas turned to her with a smirk. That sounded dangerously close to a compliment. "Don't get used to it," she said, tossing him a pair of work gloves. "You've still got the rest of the fence to go." Lucas groaned but caught the gloves. It was going to be a long afternoon. Hours later, the sun had dipped lower in the sky, casting everything in gold. Lucas leaned against the newly repaired fence, completely exhausted. His arms ached, his shirt was drenched, and he was pretty sure he had a splinter somewhere he'd regret later. But somehow, despite everything, he felt good. He glanced towards Sierra, who was surveying their work with her usual assessing gaze. "I'd give it a solid 7 out of 10, she said, finally. Lucas raised an eyebrow. 7. You do realize I nearly died out here, right? Sierra smirked. You nailed a total of 3 boards before James took over. Hardly life-threatening. Lucas exhaled dramatically. Brutal. No appreciation for the suffering of a man forced into manual labor. Sierra turned to him, amusement flickering in her eyes. Suffering, huh? He grinned. Torture, really. Sierra shook her head, but he swore he saw a hint of a smile before she turned away. For some reason, that small reaction felt like a victory. As the ranch hands packed up their tools, James walked past Lucas, clapping him on the back. You survived your first day, city boy. You might actually last a week. Lucas smirked. Oh, now you have faith in me. James chuckled. Not faith, just curiosity. We're all wondering how long before you bolt back to your penthouse. Lucas hesitated for only a second. He could leave. It would be easy. But as his gaze drifted towards Sierra, watching her talk to her brother, her hair messy from work, her expression more relaxed than he'd seen before, something about the thought of leaving didn't sit right. So instead, he smirked and looked back at James. Guess you'll just have to wait and see. James chuckled. Fair enough. By the time Lucas made it back to the guest house, his entire body felt like it had been hit by a freight train. He stepped inside, already pulling off his sweat-soaked shirt, when there was a knock at the door. He frowned, walking over and pulling it open. Sierra stood on the porch, a glass of lemonade in her hand. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then she extended it toward him. Figured you'd need this. Lucas stared at her. Didn't take you for the hospitality type. Sierra smirked. Don't get used to it. He took the glass, the cold condensation shocking against his skin. Thanks. She lingered, shifting slightly. You actually did better than I thought today. Lucas raised a brow. Is this another compliment? Sierra exhaled, clearly regretting her words. Forget it. Lucas grinned. No, I like this. Keep going. Let's hear about how impressive I was. Sierra rolled her eyes but didn't leave. Lucas took a sip of the lemonade, letting the silence stretch between them. It wasn't awkward, just different. Why'd you do it? He asked suddenly. Sierra blinked. Do what? Marry me? She inhaled sharply, looking away. You know why? Lucas studied her. You could have said no. Sierra's jaw tightened. And lose the ranch? Let my family's land disappear? She let out a humorless laugh. Not an option. Lucas nodded slowly. He understood deals, contracts, sacrifices made in the name of survival. But for the first time, he wondered if maybe, just maybe, Sierra Lawson had given up more than he realized. She turned to leave, but before she did, she glanced back at him. See you at dawn, Callahan. Then she was gone. Lucas exhaled, staring down at the lemonade in his hand. This marriage was supposed to be a transaction. Nothing more. But as he watched Sierra disappear into the night, he couldn't shake the feeling that maybe, just maybe, it was becoming something else entirely. Lucas Callahan never considered himself a morning person. Yet here he was, standing in the pre-dawn haze, watching the sky shift from ink black to deep purple. The cool morning air wrapped around him, a brief mercy before the relentless Texas sun took its place. He rolled his shoulders, muscles still sore from the day before. His body wasn't used to this kind of work. But despite the exhaustion, despite the overwhelming temptation to crawl back into bed, something about this place, about proving himself, about her, kept him standing. The sound of boots crunching against the gravel pulled his attention. Sierra walked toward him, coffee in hand, her expression unreadable. She stopped a few feet away, glancing at him like she was evaluating something. You're awake, she said finally. Lucas smirked, rubbing his jaw. I figured if I didn't show up, you'd send James to drag me out by my ankles. Sierra tilted her head. That's assuming I'd waste the effort. He chuckled, shaking his head. Charming as ever, Lawson. She handed him a second cup of coffee, hesitating for only a moment before letting go. Their fingers brushed, briefly, barely noticeable, but he felt it, and judging by the slight way Sierra's lips pressed together, so did she. He took a sip, letting the warmth settle into him. So, what's on the torture menu for today? Sierra exhaled. We need to check the south pasture before the storm rolls in. Lucas raised a brow. Storm? She nodded toward the horizon, where dark clouds loomed in the distance. Could hit us by tonight. Lucas glanced at her. And we have to prepare. How? Sierra took a sip of her coffee, eyeing him over the rim. By not slowing me down. Lucas grinned. That's not exactly motivational, sweetheart. She rolled her eyes but didn't argue. Instead, she turned on her heel and started walking toward the stables. Lucas followed. An hour later, they were saddled up and heading toward the pasture, the wind already shifting as the sky turned a heavier shade of gray. Lucas had never spent much time on a horse before. He was getting better, sure, but he still felt ridiculous next to Sierra, who rode like she'd been born in the saddle. She stayed a few paces ahead, her hair tied back, her focus completely on the land stretched before them. Lucas watched her, something pulling at him, something unfamiliar. He wasn't supposed to care. This was supposed to be a deal, nothing more. A temporary inconvenience before he returned to his real life. So why did watching Sierra ride across the open field make his chest feel different? Sierra suddenly pulled her horse to a stop. Lucas followed, slowing beside her. She pointed toward the far fence line. See that? Lucas squinted. A few of the posts had been knocked down, the wire sagging. Sierra sighed. If we don't fix it before the storm, the cattle could wander. Lucas exhaled. And let me guess, we're fixing it? She shot him a look. You learning fast. Lucas smirked, but before he could respond, a gust of wind whipped through the field, carrying the scent of rain. Sierra frowned, glancing at the sky. We need to hurry. She dismounted, tying her horse to a post. Lucas followed suit, shaking out his stiff legs before walking toward the damaged fence. Sierra knelt down, checking the wires. It's worse than I thought. Lucas crouched beside her. How bad? She blew out a breath. We'll have to restring most of it. Lucas ran a hand through his hair. Perfect. Sierra smirked. You complaining already? Lucas huffed. Never. Just mentally preparing for my inevitable suffering. She shook her head, but something in her expression softened. They worked in silence for a while, the wind picking up, rustling through the grass. Lucas focused, following her lead, doing his best not to embarrass himself. Sierra glanced at him after a while. You're getting better. Lucas raised a brow. Was that encouragement? She shrugged. Don't get used to it. He smirked. Too late. Sierra rolled her eyes, but there was a flicker of amusement there. Lucas watched her for a beat, then asked, How long have you been doing this? Sierra didn't look up. Since I was old enough to stand. Lucas leaned against the fence. You ever wanted something else? She hesitated. Then, quietly, she said, Not really. Lucas studied her. You love this place, don't you? Sierra exhaled. It's all I've ever known. For the first time, Lucas saw something beneath the steel wall she always kept up. A quiet kind of vulnerability. And before he could stop himself, he said, That why you agreed to this. Sierra stilled. The wind howled, and the first drops of rain began to fall. Lucas swallowed. Sierra. I did what I had to do, she cut in, her voice firm. But Lucas heard it, that small crack in her tone. She turned away, gripping the wire tighter, her movements tense. Lucas hesitated. Then, without thinking, he reached out. His fingers brushed against her wrist, just enough to make her pause. She inhaled sharply but didn't pull away. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The rain fell harder now, soaking into their clothes, but neither of them moved. Lucas searched her expression, trying to understand, trying to figure out why he suddenly needed to. Sierra finally pulled back, her gaze guarded. We should finish. Lucas exhaled, nodding. But something had shifted, and for the first time, Lucas wasn't sure if he wanted to leave this place at all. The rain had settled into a slow, steady drizzle by the time Lucas and Sierra finished repairing the fence. The storm never fully broke, but the sky remained heavy, the air thick with the scent of wet earth and electricity. Lucas wiped a hand down his face, pushing damp hair away from his forehead. His clothes were soaked through, clinging to his skin. Every muscle in his body ached, but strangely, he didn't mind. Sierra stood beside him, breathing heavily, her hands still gripping the fence as she surveyed their work. That should hold, she murmured. Lucas glanced at her. Strands of hair had escaped from her ponytail, sticking to her damp skin. Her cheeks were flushed, her usual hard edges softened just slightly by exhaustion. She caught him staring. What? She asked, arching a brow. Lucas smirked, leaning against the fence. Nothing. Just impressed we survived without you threatening to strangle me. Sierra exhaled, shaking her head as she turned towards her horse. It's still early. Lucas chuckled, pushing off the fence to follow her. Seriously, though, we make a good team. Sierra didn't answer right away. Instead, she reached for her horse's reins, running a soothing hand down the animal's neck. Lucas waited, sensing something in the way she hesitated. Finally, she said, "We got the job done." It wasn't exactly the response he was hoping for, but it wasn't a dismissal either. They rode back in silence, the only sound the soft rhythm of hooves against damp ground. The ranch house came into view, its porch light glowing against the grey sky, and for the first time, Lucas felt a strange sense of belonging. As they reached the barn, Sierra swung off her horse with effortless grace. Lucas followed, though his landing was noticeably less smooth. He winced, rolling his shoulders. Sierra smirked. "Sore?" Lucas groaned. "I think I lost feeling in parts of my body I didn't know existed." Sierra chuckled, a soft sound, barely there, but it was real. Lucas grinned. "Was that a laugh? Are my suffering and misery actually entertaining to you?" Sierra shook her head, but he saw the way her lips twitched. Not misery, just reality. Lucas stepped closer, leaning slightly against the stool beside her. "You know, I think you secretly enjoy having me around." Sierra scoffed. "That's a bold assumption." Lucas smirked. "I'm just saying, if I was really as useless as you claim, you wouldn't have wasted your time teaching me." She didn't respond right away, instead focusing on removing the saddle from her horse. Finally, she said, "I needed the help." Lucas watched her, knowing that wasn't the full truth. Before he could push further, the sound of boots against the barn floor made them both turn. Colt stood in the doorway, arms crossed, eyes flicking between them. Sierra straightened. "Something wrong?" Colt hesitated before speaking. "Maggie wants us all inside. Supper's ready." Lucas glanced at Sierra, catching the slight tension in her shoulders. Colt's gaze locked onto Lucas. "And you should probably clean up first, unless you like smelling like a wet barn animal." Lucas grinned. "I think I'm making it work." Colt didn't smile. "You're not." Sierra sighed, already walking past them. "Come on. I don't want to hear your bickering all night." Lucas watched her go, then turned back to Colt. "You really don't like me, do you?" Lucas mused. Colt shrugged. "Just waiting to see if you'll run." Lucas tilted his head. "And if I don't?" Colt studied him for a long moment. Then, without another word, he turned and followed Sierra out of the barn. Lucas exhaled, running a hand down his face. Apparently, proving himself wasn't going to be just about ranch work. The dining table was warm and full of conversation when Lucas finally stepped inside. Maggie moved around the kitchen, setting out fresh cornbread and stew, while Sierra and Colt sat across from each other, engaged in quiet conversation. Lucas pulled out a chair, settling in beside Maggie, who passed him a plate. "Hope you're hungry," she said with a smile. Lucas looked at the food, real food, made with care, the kind he never had growing up in high-rise penthouses, with personal chefs and business dinners. He nodded, starving. Sierra shot him a look. "Hard work will do that to you." Lucas smirked. Not sure if that was a compliment or an insult. Maggie chuckled. "If it's from Sierra, assume both." Sierra rolled her eyes, but Lucas swore he saw a flicker of amusement before she looked away. They ate in relative peace, but Lucas couldn't shake the feeling that something lingered between him and Sierra. Something unspoken. She caught him looking once or twice, but she never held his gaze for long. And for the first time since coming here, Lucas wondered if maybe, just maybe, he wasn't the only one feeling it. Lucas Callahan wasn't sure when the ranch had stopped feeling like a prison sentence and started feeling like something else. The night air was cool against his skin as he stepped onto the wraparound porch of the main house, the distant sound of crickets filling the quiet. Supper had ended over an hour ago, but he couldn't bring himself to retreat to the guest house just yet. Something about the stillness of the evening, The scent of fresh-cut hay lingering in the air made it hard to leave. Or maybe it was the fact that Sierra was still out here. She stood at the far end of the porch, arms crossed, gazing out at the open fields. She hadn't said much at dinner, but Lucas had caught her sneaking glances his way. He just wasn't sure if she was watching him or watching him, waiting to see if he'd trip up, if he'd finally admit that this wasn't the life for him. But the truth was, the thought of leaving was becoming less appealing by the day. He stepped closer, leaning against the wooden railing. "You always this quiet at night, or am I just lucky?" Sierra didn't look at him. "I think we both know you're not that lucky." Lucas chuckled, shaking his head. "Ouch. And here I thought we were making progress." Sierra exhaled, shifting slightly. "Long day." Lucas studied her profile, the way the soft glow from the porch light outlined her face. "You mean dealing with me all day?" "Yeah, I imagine that is exhausting." She let out a short laugh. Quiet, but real. It surprised him. "Not everything's about you, Callahan," she said, finally turning towards him. Lucas raised a brow. "That almost sounded like you enjoy my company." Sierra gave him a look. "Let's not get carried away." He grinned. "See, there it is again. You like having me around." She shook her head, but there was no real bite behind it. Just something softer. Something Lucas hadn't seen before. The silence stretched between them, thick with something unspoken. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of earth and the distant sound of horses in the pasture. It was peaceful. She was peaceful, even in her stubbornness. Lucas exhaled. "You ever think about leaving?" Sierra blinked, caught off guard. "Leaving?" He gestured toward the land stretching endlessly in front of them. "Yeah, packing up, starting over somewhere else." Sierra hesitated, her gaze flickering toward the fields. "No." Lucas tilted his head. "Never?" She shook her head. "This is my home." Lucas watched her, curious. "You never wanted more?" Her lips pressed together. "More doesn't always mean better." He understood that more than he wanted to admit. Sierra shifted, glancing at him. "What about you?" Lucas smirked. "What about me?" She narrowed her eyes slightly. "You've had everything. Money, connections, a life people dream about. You ever stop to wonder if it was enough?" Lucas didn't answer right away. Because the truth was, he had wondered. More times than he could count. Before he could respond, the sound of an approaching truck rumbled through the quiet. Lucas turned, watching as headlights cut through the darkness, dust kicking up along the gravel driveway. Sierra stiffened beside him. "Blake." Lucas didn't need to ask. He already knew. The truck rolled to a stop and a familiar figure stepped out, moving toward the house with the kind of confidence that said he still believed he belonged here. Blake Carter. Lucas sighed. "Well, this should be fun." Sierra exhaled sharply, clearly not in the mood for whatever was about to happen. Blake stopped at the bottom of the porch steps, his gaze locking onto Sierra's. "Can we talk?" Sierra's jaw tightened. "It's late." Blake didn't move. "Won't take long." Lucas leaned against the railing, crossing his arms. "You know, for a guy who's supposed to be ex-fiancé, you sure show up a lot." Blake's eyes flicked toward him, then back to Sierra. "Alone." Lucas arched a brow. "See, that's the thing about marriage. We kind of come as a package deal now." Sierra shot Lucas a sharp look, but he ignored it, keeping his gaze locked on Blake. Blake exhaled, frustration flickering across his face. "Sierra." She hesitated, then glanced at Lucas. "Give us a minute." Lucas felt something tighten in his chest, something he had no business feeling, but he nodded anyway. He stepped back into the house, closing the door behind him. But he didn't go far. Instead, he lingered just inside the entryway, out of sight, listening. Blake's voice was low but firm. "You don't have to do this." Sierra sighed. Blake, you don't love him. Lucas's chest tightened. Sierra's response was immediate. This isn't about love, Blake scoffed. That's my point. You're doing this for the ranch, for your family. But what about you? Lucas swallowed, his hands curling into fists at his sides. Sierra's voice was quieter now. It's done. Blake didn't answer right away. When he finally spoke, his voice was softer. It doesn't have to be. Lucas closed his eyes, exhaling slowly. He didn't know why he was still standing there, why he was listening to a conversation that wasn't his to hear. But something about the way Blake spoke, the way he was trying to pull Sierra back, made something uncomfortable settle in Lucas's chest. And then, Sierra's next words hit him harder than he expected. I made my choice. The silence outside was thick, and for a moment, Lucas wondered if Blake was going to push again. But then there was the sound of footsteps, the truck door opening, and the engine starting. Lucas turned just as Sierra walked back inside. She stopped when she saw him. They stood there, just a few feet apart, something unreadable in her gaze. Lucas searched her expression, trying to figure out if she meant it, if she really meant it. She sighed, running a hand through her hair. You don't have to look at me like that. Lucas tilted his head. Like what? Sierra exhaled. Like you're trying to figure me out. He smirked, leaning against the doorway. Maybe I am. Sierra shook her head, but she didn't leave. Lucas hesitated, then said, Did you mean it? She looked at him. He took a step closer. That you made your choice. Sierra held his gaze for a long moment. Then, softly, but with certainty, she said, Yes. Lucas wasn't sure why that mattered so much, but for the first time since arriving here, something in his chest settled. Maybe this wasn't just a deal anymore. Maybe it was something more. Lucas Callahan was starting to realize that the ranch had a rhythm, one that had nothing to do with schedules or responsibilities, and everything to do with her. Sierra moved through the days like she was part of the land itself. She knew exactly where the wind shifted before a storm, the way the cattle reacted before a cold front, the sound of boots on the wooden porch before someone even knocked. And, without meaning to, Lucas had found himself drawn into that rhythm. He had started waking up before dawn, not because she made him, but because he wanted to. He had started paying attention, learning the work, not just going through the motions, and he had started noticing the way Sierra's sharp edges softened when she thought no one was looking. But the thing that unnerved him most, he didn't know when it had started mattering. Now, standing on the porch with his coffee in hand, watching Sierra saddle up her horse for the day, he felt that quiet pull settle deeper in his chest. He was supposed to be thinking about his exit strategy, about how this was all temporary. Instead, he found himself wondering what it would take to make her really smile. Don't just stand there, Callahan, Sierra called, tightening the saddle. We've got work to do. Lucas smirked, stepping down onto the dirt. You know, I'm starting to think you enjoy bossing me around. Sierra didn't look up. If I waited for you to figure things out on your own, we'd get nothing done. He chuckled, shaking his head. And here I thought we were past the insults. She glanced at him then, something flickering in her hazel eyes, something that wasn't quite amusement, but wasn't quite the usual exasperation either. Lucas caught that look, and for some reason, it made his heart pick up. Sierra turned away before he could say anything. We're moving the herd to the east pasture. Try not to fall off your horse this time. Lucas placed a hand over his chest, mock offended. That happened once. Sierra shot him a look. Once was enough. He grinned, but as he mounted his horse, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was shifting between them. Slowly. Quietly. And it scared him more than he cared to admit. The sun was high by the time they reached the east pasture, the herd moving steadily as Sierra and Lucas rode alongside them. The land stretched endlessly ahead, the golden field swaying in the breeze. Lucas had never been one for silence, but out here, it wasn't uncomfortable. It was peaceful. Or at least, it was until Sierra broke it. "You didn't answer my question last night." Lucas blinked, pulling his horse up beside hers. "Which one?" She kept her eyes ahead. "About your life. If you ever wondered if it was enough." Lucas exhaled, gripping the reins a little tighter. He didn't expect her to bring that up again. He thought about brushing it off, giving her the easy answer, but something about the way she was waiting, really waiting, made him hesitate. "I used to think it was," he admitted. Sierra glanced at him. "And now?" Lucas let out a slow breath. "Now, I'm not so sure." She didn't respond right away. The wind moved between them, stirring the silence. Then, softly, she said, "Maybe that's not a bad thing." Lucas turned to her, but before he could speak, a distant sound caught his attention. A truck approaching from the road. Sierra stiffened immediately. Lucas followed her gaze, his stomach tightening as the vehicle rolled up toward the pasture. Dust kicked up behind it, the rumble of the engine growing louder. The moment it stopped, Lucas recognized the sleek, polished exterior. His chest tightened. He didn't need to see the man inside to know exactly who it was. William Callahan. His father. Sierra's expression hardened, but she didn't move. She waited as the door opened, as polished dress shoes stepped onto the dirt, as William adjusted his suit jacket like the wind itself was an inconvenience. Lucas exhaled sharply, swinging off his horse. "This should be good." William's gaze swept over the pasture, then landed on him. His lips curved in that knowing, calculating way that Lucas had grown up with. "I see you're still here." Lucas smirked. "Disappointed?" William didn't answer. Instead, his gaze shifted toward Sierra. Sierra met his stare evenly, arms crossed. "If you came all this way to check up on your investment, you could have called." William chuckled, slow and measured. "I wanted to see for myself." His eyes flicked back to Lucas. "And I have to admit, I'm surprised." Lucas tilted his head. "That I haven't run back to Houston yet?" William smirked. "That you haven't realized how temporary all of this is?" Sierra's jaw tightened. Lucas exhaled. "Cut to the chase, Dad." William's expression didn't waver. "I came to offer you a way out." Lucas felt Sierra shift beside him, but he didn't look at her. William continued. "You've done your part. The land is secured, and from what I hear, the ranch is already seeing the financial benefit of your arrangement." He gestured loosely. "It was a good deal, but we both know you don't belong here." Lucas felt something sharp twist in his chest. William's voice dropped slightly, deliberate. "There's a position waiting for you back in Houston, a project of your own, full autonomy. You can build something real." Lucas clenched his jaw. "And if I say no?" William's gaze darkened just slightly. "Then you're wasting your time." Silence stretched. Lucas felt Sierra beside him, unmoving. And in that moment, he realized something. This wasn't just a test. This was a choice. Not between staying and going. Not between wealth and hard work. But between the life he had always known and the one that was starting to feel like his. Lucas exhaled, his voice steady. "You think this is temporary?" William didn't answer. Lucas nodded, taking a step forward. "Maybe I did too." He let out a small laugh, shaking his head. "But it's funny, this place, this life. It's the first thing that's ever felt real." William's expression faltered, just slightly. Lucas looked at Sierra then, and for the first time, she wasn't guarded. She was waiting. Lucas turned back to his father, his voice firm. "I'm not leaving." William's eyes narrowed. "Be careful, son. You don't want to make a mistake you can't undo." Lucas didn't blink. "Maybe it's not a mistake." William studied him for a long moment, then exhaled, smoothing his suit jacket. Your choice. He turned without another word, stepping back into the truck. A moment later, the engine roared to life, kicking up dust as it sped down the dirt road, back toward the city. Lucas let out a slow breath. Then he turned. Sierra was still watching him. Neither of them spoke, but something had changed. Lucas had chosen. And judging by the way Sierra's expression softened, just slightly, maybe, just maybe, she was starting to believe him. Lucas had expected a reaction from Sierra after his father left. Something, anything, a challenge, a sharp remark, maybe even a quiet "why?" But instead, she had said nothing. She had only looked at him, her expression unreadable, before turning back to the horses. And for the rest of the afternoon, she worked in silence, as if nothing had changed, except everything had changed. Lucas had made his choice. He wasn't leaving. But now, as he stood outside the barn, watching Sierra from a few feet away, he realized that choosing to stay was the easy part. Convincing Sierra that he meant it, that was something else entirely. "You're being awfully quiet," he finally said, leaning against a wooden post. Sierra didn't look up as she adjusted the saddle on her horse. "Just thinking." Lucas smirked. "That's dangerous." She exhaled, shaking her head. "I don't get you, Callahan." He raised a brow. "I get that a lot." She finally turned to face him, crossing her arms. "Your father just offered you everything. Your old life, your future, freedom, and you turned him down, just like that." Lucas shrugged. "Yeah, I did." Sierra searched his face. "Why?" Lucas held her gaze. There were 1,000 reasons. Because the life he had before never felt real. Because he was tired of running. Because somehow, this place, this life, had started to feel like his. But mostly because of her. He swallowed, shoving his hands in his pockets. "Maybe I've finally figured out what I want." Sierra's breath hitched, just slightly. "And you think it's this? Here?" Lucas nodded. "Yeah." Her fingers tightened around the reins. "Lucas, I'm not expecting you to believe me right away," he cut in, stepping closer. "But I'm not leaving, Sierra. Not today, not tomorrow." His voice dropped slightly. "Not at all." Sierra didn't move, didn't speak. Lucas could see the battle in her eyes, the hesitation, the doubt, the part of her that wanted to believe him, but was terrified to. Then, before she could respond, the sound of a truck approaching pulled their attention toward the road. Lucas turned, already knowing who it was, before the vehicle even came to a stop. Blake. Lucas exhaled, glancing at Sierra. Her expression had closed off. Guarded, but the way her fingers curled into fists at her sides told him she wasn't happy about this visit. Blake climbed out of the truck, his gaze immediately locking onto Sierra. "We need to talk." Sierra's shoulders tensed. "Blake." "Alone." Lucas let out a slow breath. "Of course." He glanced at Sierra, waiting for her reaction. She hesitated. Just for a second. Then she turned to Lucas. "I'll handle this." Lucas clenched his jaw, but he nodded. Because as much as he wanted to tell Blake to get lost, this wasn't his call. Not yet. Sierra walked toward the truck, and Lucas stayed behind, watching as Blake leaned in, voice low. Lucas couldn't hear what he was saying, but he didn't need to. Blake's body language, the way he reached for Sierra's arm, the way she pulled back, it told him everything. Lucas had spent his life in boardrooms, negotiating deals, reading people before they even spoke. And right now, Blake wasn't here for closure. He was here for another chance. Lucas exhaled sharply, staring at the ground as he fought the urge to step in. This wasn't his fight, not yet, but God, he wanted it to be. A few minutes later, Sierra stepped back, crossing her arms. Blake's shoulders tensed. He said something else. something that made Sierra stiffen, before turning, climbing back into his truck, and speeding off down the road. Lucas waited. Sierra stood there for a long moment, staring at the dust cloud left behind. Then, finally, she turned and walked back toward him. Lucas raised a brow. "Well?" Sierra let out a slow breath. "He thinks I'm making a mistake." Lucas smirked. "That's funny. Your ex and my father should start the club." Sierra didn't laugh. Lucas studied her, his expression softening. "And what do you think?" She hesitated. Then, quietly, she said, "I don't know." Lucas felt something tighten in his chest. She wasn't saying no, but she wasn't saying yes either. And somehow, that was worse. He nodded slowly, stepping back. "Guess I'll just have to prove you wrong then." Sierra blinked, caught off guard. "Lucas, I meant what I said." His voice was quiet, steady. "I'm not going anywhere." She swallowed. For the first time, she looked uncertain. Not because she didn't believe him, but because she wanted to. And that was enough, for now. The days stretched longer now. Not because of the work, Lucas had gotten used to that, but because of her. Sierra Lawson was a puzzle, and the more time he spent with her, the more he wanted to figure her out. She hadn't spoken much since Blake left. Not about what was said, not about how she felt, not about anything that actually mattered. And that was the problem. Lucas wasn't used to wanting answers. He was used to moving on, letting things roll off his back. But Sierra, she made him want to know, and he wasn't sure if that was a good thing. Now, standing in the barn, as the late afternoon sun bled through the open doors, he watched her. She was brushing down one of the horses, focused, careful, as if the simple task could keep her mind from wandering too far. Lucas wasn't going to let her hide forever. "You ever going to tell me what he said?" Sierra didn't look up. "Not much to tell." Lucas crossed his arms. "You know that's a lie, right?" Sierra sighed, shaking her head. "Blake thinks I made a mistake, thinks I should have waited, that maybe I still can." Lucas inhaled slowly, letting the words settle between them. "And?" Sierra finally glanced at him, her eyes unreadable. "And what?" Lucas took a step closer, lowering his voice. "Do you think you made a mistake?" She hesitated, just for a second, and that second nearly knocked the air out of his lungs. "I don't know," she admitted quietly. Lucas studied her, something tightening in his chest. Because that wasn't a no. It wasn't a yes either, but it wasn't a no. Sierra turned back to the horse, running a hand down its mane. "I didn't choose this, Lucas." He exhaled. "I know." She swallowed. "And I don't know if I'll ever be able to see it as anything other than what it is." Lucas felt his jaw tighten. "And what is it?" She looked at him then, her gaze steady. "A deal." The words hit harder than they should have. Lucas let out a slow breath, dragging a hand through his hair. "A deal," he repeated, tasting the weight of it. Sierra didn't flinch. Lucas laughed under his breath, shaking his head. "That's funny, because it doesn't feel like a deal anymore." Sierra's lips parted slightly, but she said nothing. Lucas stepped closer, close enough that the air between them thickened. "You want the truth?" he asked quietly. Sierra's breath hitched. "Lucas, you keep trying to convince yourself this is just business," he continued, voice lower now, rougher, "that this is something you have to do. But tell me." He reached up, fingers brushing against her wrist. She didn't pull away. "Why does it feel like more?" Sierra swallowed hard. "It can't be more." "Why not?" Her chest rose and fell a little too fast. "Because that's not what we agreed to." Lucas let out a slow, knowing exhale. "Screw the agreement." Sierra closed her eyes briefly, like she was trying to will away whatever was happening between them. Lucas didn't move, didn't let her escape. "You're scared," he murmured. Sierra's eyes flashed open, sharp and defensive. I'm not scared. Lucas tilted his head, smirking. Liar. Her jaw clenched. Lucas, don't what? He pushed. Don't say what we both know is true. Sierra exhaled sharply, stepping back. The loss of space between them shouldn't have bothered him, but it did. This isn't real, she said, her voice steadier now, more controlled. Lucas watched her carefully. Feels pretty real to me. Sierra shook her head, turning away. I can't do this right now. Lucas let out a breath, rubbing the back of his neck. He could push, but something told him she needed space. Fine, he murmured. Run from it if you want. Sierra stiffened. Lucas exhaled, stepping toward the barn doors. He paused before leaving, glancing back. But just so we're clear. His voice was quieter now, softer. I'm not going anywhere, Sierra. She didn't turn, didn't move, but the way her fingers tightened against the brush told him she'd heard him. And for now, that was enough. The ranch was quiet that night, too quiet. Lucas sat on the porch of the guest house, a cold drink in his hand, watching the sky shift into deep shades of blue. The stars were out, stretching endlessly above him, but his mind was anywhere but peaceful. He replayed the conversation with Sierra over and over, the weight of her words settling deep in his chest. This isn't real, except it was. And that was the problem. She was fighting it, fighting them. But why? What was she so afraid of? A soft creak of wood caught his attention. Lucas turned, and there she was. Sierra stood just beyond the porch light, arms crossed over her chest. She looked hesitant, uncertain. Two things she rarely ever was. Lucas exhaled, setting his drink down. Didn't think I'd see you tonight. Sierra shifted. Couldn't sleep. Lucas smirked. Guilt keeping you up? She shot him a look. For what? For lying. Sierra's jaw tightened. I didn't lie. Lucas tilted his head. You sure? Because when you said this isn't real earlier, it sounded a lot like someone trying to convince themselves of something that's already too late to deny. Sierra exhaled sharply. Lucas! He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. Tell me the truth. Sierra's fingers curled into the fabric of her sweater. About what? Lucas's voice dropped slightly. Why you keep running? She didn't respond right away. Instead, she looked past him, out toward the fields, as if searching for an answer in the darkness. Then, quietly, she said, Because I don't trust it. Lucas frowned. Trust what? Sierra swallowed hard. That this isn't just temporary. Lucas exhaled. So that was it. She wasn't afraid of him. She was afraid of losing him. Lucas stood slowly, closing the distance between them. Sierra stiffened slightly but didn't move away. He searched her face, speaking carefully. I told you. I'm not leaving. Sierra let out a quiet, bitter laugh. Lucas, people don't just change overnight. Lucas arched a brow. You think that's what this is? Some phase? Sierra met his gaze, something vulnerable flickering in her expression. I think that if you wake up tomorrow and realize this isn't what you want, I'm the one who has to live with it. Lucas felt something deep in his chest twist. He reached out slowly, brushing his fingers along her wrist. Sierra hesitated, then squeezed his hand back. Now we work, like always. Lucas grinned. So, no dramatic running into the sunset just yet? Sierra shot him a look. Absolutely not. Lucas chuckled, but he didn't let go of her hand. And for the first time, she didn't let go of his either. Maybe that was enough. For now. The sun was setting over the Lawson Ranch, painting the sky in hues of deep orange and soft pink. The air was thick with the scent of earth and wildflowers, the kind of evening that made everything feel quieter, more settled. But Lucas Callahan wasn't settled. Not yet. Not until he knew for sure. Sierra stood near the fence line, watching the cattle graze, her expression unreadable. She had been distant all day. Not cold, not pulling away, but thinking. And Lucas had learned by now that when Sierra was thinking, it meant she was wrestling with something too big to say out loud. He wasn't about to let her fight this battle alone. Lucas exhaled, stepping beside her, resting his arms on the wooden beam. "You gonna keep pretending nothing's changed?" Sierra didn't look at him. "Everything's changed." Lucas tilted his head, studying her profile. "And that scares you?" Sierra swallowed. "Doesn't it scare you?" Lucas didn't hesitate. "No." That made her finally turn toward him, eyes searching his. "How can you be so sure?" Lucas let out a breath, dragging a hand through his hair. "Because for the first time in my life, I know exactly what I want." Sierra blinked, her jaw tightening slightly. "And you think it's this?" Lucas turned fully, facing her. "Number, I know it is." Sierra looked away, exhaling slowly. "Lucas, this started as a deal. This wasn't supposed to be something." Lucas nodded. "And yet, here we are." Sierra let out a soft laugh, shaking her head. "You make it sound so simple." "It is simple," Lucas said, his voice quieter now. "You just don't want to believe it." Sierra's lips parted slightly, and for the first time, there was no sharp comeback, no stubborn retort. Just silence. Lucas took a step closer, closing the distance between them. "Sierra, I didn't stay because of the ranch, or because of some contract." His voice softened. "I stayed because of you." She inhaled sharply, her fingers gripping the fence. "Lucas." He reached out, brushing his knuckles against her cheek. "Tell me you don't feel it too." She closed her eyes briefly, as if trying to block out whatever war was raging inside her. But when she opened them again, she didn't pull away. "I do," she admitted, so quietly he barely heard it. "I do feel it." Lucas's heart kicked against his ribs, but he forced himself to stay steady. "Then why are you still running?" Sierra exhaled, frustration flickering in her eyes. "Because I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to let someone in without being afraid they'll leave." Lucas swallowed hard. "I'm not leaving." Sierra shook her head, stepping back. "But what if one day you wake up and this isn't what you want anymore? What if I let myself believe in this, and it falls apart?" Lucas took a deep breath, steady and slow. Then, without another word, he reached into his pocket. Sierra froze as he pulled out a small, simple ring. Not flashy, not something meant to impress, just real. Lucas held it out, his gaze locked onto hers. "Then let's stop wondering." Sierra's breath hitched. "Lucas, I don't want maybes, or what ifs, or waiting for the perfect moment." His voice was raw now, unguarded. "I want this, with you, whatever that looks like." Sierra looked at the ring, then at him, something breaking in her expression. Lucas took her hand, pressing the ring into her palm. "You don't have to say yes today. You don't have to say yes tomorrow." His voice was steady, unwavering. "But when you're ready, I'll be here." Sierra stared at him, eyes glassy with something unspoken, something fragile and real. And then, finally, she whispered, "Okay." Lucas exhaled, his entire body relaxing. Then, Sierra did something that nearly knocked the air out of his lungs. She stepped forward, wrapping her arms around his neck, pulling him into a kiss that was different from the last. Not hesitant, not afraid, just hers. Lucas smiled against her lips, knowing, finally, that this was real, that they were real, and that was enough. It was always enough. She didn't pull away. "Sierra," he murmured, "you really think I'd do that to you?" Her breath hitched. "I don't want to think that, but I don't know how to believe anything else." Lucas's jaw tightened. She had spent her whole life fighting for things. The ranch, her family, stability. No one had ever stayed just for her. And suddenly, Lucas hated everyone who had made her feel that way. He cupped her jaw gently, tilting her face toward his. "Then let me prove it." Sierra swallowed. "How?" Lucas held her gaze, his thumb brushing lightly against her cheek. "Stay." His voice was low, steady. "Right here with me. No running, no shutting me out." Sierra's lips parted slightly. "Lucas." "I'll show you," he said softly. "Every single day, if you let me." Sierra was breathing faster now, her hands gripping the fabric of his shirt. For the first time, she wasn't pulling away. Lucas leaned in slowly, giving her time, giving her space to stop him. She didn't. And then, finally, she kissed him. It wasn't soft. It wasn't careful. It was everything that had been building between them. All the tension, all the stubbornness, all the quiet moments where words weren't enough. Sierra pressed closer, her fingers curling into his collar, and Lucas wrapped an arm around her waist, pulling her against him. The world faded. The only thing that mattered was this. When she finally pulled back, her breathing unsteady, Lucas rested his forehead against hers, smiling slightly. "See," he whispered. "Real." Sierra closed her eyes briefly, as if trying to hold on to the moment. Then, so softly he barely heard it, she whispered, "Okay." And Lucas Callahan knew he was never letting her go. The morning light crept through the ranch, golden and soft, but Lucas Callahan was already awake. He hadn't slept much, not because of restlessness, but because of her. Sierra. She had kissed him. Really kissed him. And for the first time since this whole arrangement started, she hadn't pushed him away. She hadn't built another wall or thrown another excuse between them. She'd said okay, and Lucas Callahan wasn't about to let her forget it. With a slow exhale, he pushed himself out of bed, stretching the stiffness from his muscles. The air smelled of morning dew and fresh hay, the world still quiet except for the occasional rustle of movement from the barn. He didn't bother checking his phone. For once, nothing outside this place mattered. He stepped outside, the crisp air waking him up instantly. He spotted Sierra near the corral, saddling up her horse, her hair pulled back in a messy bun. She looked calm, like last night hadn't changed anything. But Lucas knew better. He leaned against the wooden fence, watching her. "You planning on sneaking off without me?" Sierra barely glanced up. "Not sneaking, just working." Lucas smirked. That's what people say when they're trying to avoid something. Sierra tightened the saddle strap a little harder than necessary. "And what exactly am I avoiding, Callahan?" Lucas stepped closer, his voice dropping. "Me." Sierra stilled. Lucas waited, watching the way her fingers flexed against the leather reins. He saw the hesitation, the battle happening inside her. Last night had cracked something open, something she wasn't sure how to handle. Finally, she exhaled, shaking her head. "I don't know how to do this." Lucas softened, reaching out to trail his fingers along the back of her hand. "Then we figure it out. Together." Sierra swallowed hard, her jaw tight. "Lucas, I don't—" She stopped herself, closing her eyes briefly before looking at him again. "I just don't want to lose myself in this." Lucas frowned. "What do you mean?" Sierra stepped back, crossing her arms. "I spent my whole life fighting to keep this ranch, fighting to be strong enough to run it on my own. I don't know how to be with someone without feeling like I'm giving up who I am." Lucas exhaled slowly. He understood, more than she probably realized. "You think being with me means losing yourself?" His voice was steady, but there was something beneath it, something vulnerable. Sierra looked away, biting her lip. "I think I've spent so long being just the girl who holds this place together that I don't know how to be anything else." Lucas nodded, stepping closer, slow and deliberate. I don't want to take anything from you, Sierra. I don't want to change you. I just... He reached for her hand, threading his fingers through hers. I just want you. Sierra's breath hitched, but she didn't pull away. Lucas squeezed her hand gently. You don't have to do everything alone anymore. Sierra exhaled, her shoulders finally relaxing just a little. That's the problem, Lucas. I don't know how to let someone else in. Lucas smirked. Well, lucky for you, I'm pretty stubborn. Sierra let out a small laugh, shaking her head. Yeah, I figured that out already. Lucas tilted his head, searching her face. So, what now?